How's it going, Woods and Forests Media? We have another CCH podcast. We're joined by another friend, somebody who I've appeared on his podcast, and he's appeared on here as well. Not a unfamiliar face, but somebody who's definitely got a very good reach and a great background in all things amphibians, especially with dart frogs. And I asked him to come back because I thought we could have a really interesting conversation about a lot of different topics. We're going to talk about some new trending stories that came out about frogs, and we're going to talk about the pet industry and a lot of other things as well. But Dan, please introduce yourself for the listeners who might not have heard the first time you came on or don't know what Amphibicast is. And again, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me back on. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, so my professional name is Dendrobates, a play on Dendrobates, which is the genus of some of the poison frogs. And I host a podcast called Amphibicast, which focuses on a variety of amphibian issues. I tend to skew more towards the Dendrobatids, but I cover issues related to conservation, research. I have discussions with other hobbyists. I talk to plant people. Any number of different topics is kind of what the show is about. I got a little graphic there.
I just threw you completely off.
That's okay. Yeah, it's funny because you said a familiar face. I should really say familiar voice, because the only time I'm ever on video is when I'm on somebody else's show. So the only people that have seen my face have been people who've seen your channel, Animals at Home, and Project Herpetoculture and Tarantula Collective. Other than that, I have no physical presence on my podcast. I don't do YouTube or anything like that as of yet, anyway.
You're strictly audio as of right now.
Yes.
So why don't you talk about the other ones you just mentioned? So people have seen you on this podcast, but you have others that you brought up. So what's going on? Project Herpetoculture, and you said something about an invertebrate one as well, correct?
I've been fortunate to made friends and acquaintances with some very good content creators, many of them podcasters, and we've done some collabs, and I've been guests on people's shows, and they've been guests on my show. And I can give you a quick run through. Animals at Home with Dylan Perrin, Phil and Roy at Project Herpetoculture, which is part of their network. Richard Stewart from the Tarantula Collective. He has his podcast was the Exotic Pet Collective, and yours, of course. I've been on yours a few times. So I think all of us kind of have, I guess some this, maybe the same sense of perspective in terms of what we want out of content, what we want to put out there, and we've all done collabs over the past 4 years, and it's just a few people that I respect. I enjoy their podcasts, and yeah.
Are you more of are you becoming more of a regular, or is that something? It was a series of videos and now it's kind of ended.
They do video. They do video and audio. I'm solely audio, in part because I'm kind of a shy person, but also I just don't have the time and the resources to do video, because that takes a lot longer. And when I started out, I kind of wanted to focus solely on the audio rather than throw another problem in there that I wasn't ready to solve. I'm not tech savvy enough yet to handle video.
Oh, I completely get that.
Which is pathetic, but let's be honest about it. It is pretty pathetic.
I think that you would do very well with video, especially because of the voice that you've established through audio. Sometimes it's really either relaxing, or it's very eye-catching for somebody that has a very good voice. I guarantee if you read your kids' bedtime stories, they would probably be very entertained with your voice over mine or a lot of other people's, just because you have a natural act for audio.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a different animal when you think about it. Nope, no pun intended. But I mean, you and I were talking off air before we started about audio quality, and I put my mic through here, so I'm hoping we get the best audio quality we can. But with podcasts that are solely video, you've got a visual presence to engage with. You can watch the people talk. I know people like to watch YouTube videos of podcasts, but with the audio, I really can't skimp on the good production. So I try to get the best audio that I can, and I try to get the best audio I can for my guests, even if it means having them do some weird stuff. I've had to have people move into different parts of their rooms. I've had people, um, like, you have your air conditioner off. I've had to make all sorts of crazy requests. And I said, I feel bad, but say, look, I'm like, I can hear a teapot steaming on the second floor of your house. I'm like, go upstairs, turn the oven off, turn the lights off, go over to this room and take your ear. But it sounds ridiculous, but I'm kind of a perfectionist with that. And people have been good. I've had guests that have always been accommodating, and I just try to give everybody a good experience, myself, the listeners, and the guests, and I try to just leave everybody with something that I'm proud of, and I hope everybody else enjoys.
Well, I think it's noteworthy too with having you come back on. There are a handful of listeners from Amphibicast that found us, that found Woods and Forests Media because of Amphibicast, and I'm sure that they're going to be very pleased to see you again on the channel. But also now that we're like clipping out smaller reels from CapCut, I'm really excited because if they didn't watch the long form or even know, maybe they didn't get the bell icon to know that you were on, they're going to see the Instagram reels and they're going to say, wait a minute, is that Dan? Is that Dan from Amphibicast? They're going to pick up on the voice, if anything. So it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen with some of these like shorter segments. But
people have told me that I have a unique voice.
You do, and it's fantastic. It's made for a podcast. But I think it's incredible. But I also think that we owe you a lot of thanks. I'm very grateful because if we hadn't been a part of some of your podcasts, if I wasn't on, I don't know that we would have as many of our listeners that really care about the content, and they found us because of you. So I just wanted to say that for encouragement, because you might have done that for other people too. Whether or not they share it with you is another story, but I'm just going to be open about it.
I try to be, not that I'm anybody special, but I try to be humble throughout this process, because you know what? Someone that you interview today as a friend might be someone who you will need as a friend down the line. And I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I don't judge people by their Instagram followers or whether they have a viral TikTok or whether they work here or whether they work there. I interview people of all different walks of life. And you know what? I want to mention something I forgot before. Bill Strand and the Chameleon Academy and the Reptile Entrepreneur podcast. Bill and I had done several collabs over the years. We haven't spoken in a while, but Bill really did pioneer the reptile podcast. I think he's been doing this over 8 years or something like that. And Bill also has a very unique voice, and he's got a very unique persona about him, which lends itself very, very well to media and audio. So he was another party that I forgot to mention earlier, who I would just like to give a quick shout out to, because Bill was also very instrumental in giving me advice and guidance, and also being someone who I kind of wanted to operate in that same framework, if you will. So, Bill, if you're listening, thank you. I appreciate the input and the help. But yeah, and as far as my voice goes, one of the more humbling, it was a very nice, and one of the more humbling moments in my podcasting career, I guess you want to call it, was I was at American Frog Day 2021, going back 3 years ago, and I was talking to somebody, and somebody I didn't know came up to me and said, Dan. I said, yeah. I said, how'd you know it was me? I recognize the voice. Oh, I was like, and this is down the hall because I'm kind of loud. But that was a humbling thing. But I was grateful for that. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a little side quest there.
No, I think that's great. And that's really cool to hear. Somebody gave you a break, somebody wanted to have you on, and now you're doing that for a lot of other people as well. So it just shows you reciprocated, or what is it called, you paid it forward for the next guy, if you will. I know we talk a lot about that during the holidays. You know, somebody buys a cup of coffee for the next person. I think of it kind of like that in a way, like somebody bought you a cup and now you're buying a lot more cups for others as well in some ways.
Yeah. Well, people took a chance when I first started out. When I first started, I couldn't get anybody to, I mean, well, I shouldn't say anybody, but getting anybody from the scientific community took a lot of effort. And in the beginnings, again, another person to give some credit to was Mark Mandika from the Amphibian Foundation. Mark was my first scientific community guest, and he was very instrumental in helping me engage people from the scientific community because you're starting out, you don't really have a reputation, people don't necessarily know who you are and are you the type of show that they'd want to be on. So he was a big catalyst in me being able to move forward with the show and engage different types of guests that weren't just in the hobby. And that's not to discredit him. That's not to put anybody in the scientific community on a higher pedestal than hobbyists. But I, I mean, I've had people, even like people approach me for some unusual topics, and I very rarely say no, because if you can come on the show and you can be interesting and you can tell a story that's somehow related to frogs or amphibians in some way, I mean, I'd appreciate that stuff. I mean, I had a guest who does stop motion filmmaking. I had a guest that was filming or trying to get together the resources to film a documentary on salamanders in South America. I had a Japanese monk on my show who works with Japanese giant salamanders. So I've had a pretty eclectic bunch on the show, and it just seems like once you get somebody, once you get that right person on the show who is helpful, it really does open the door. And if I can reciprocate that to somebody else who's starting off or wants to create content, if you're in it for the right reasons, people will see that. So I like to provide people an opportunity to talk about their projects on the show. I mean, within reason. I mean, don't there's certain stuff I'm going to say no to, but within reason, I try to stay pretty objective, and I try to keep the door open to people who have a legitimate interest in this type of content and they have an affinity for amphibians.
I think that's a really good segue into the next thing I wanted to ask you. Like, how has your podcast changed over the years? You know, you said it's been a few years now. Has there been anything that you've been either flirting around with that you want to make different, or something that you've been adding in? If it's something that you don't think we should really cover, it's okay. We can kind of move on to the next topic. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity here to kind of think about it or put it together.
Well, as the podcast goes, I started it because, I mean, going back to my life, and not to get too personal, but I went through some difficult times, and during those times, I relied on podcasts to help me sleep at night. One of the issues I had was compounded by lack of sleep, so I started listening to a lot of paranormal podcasts and things like that, and I just found enjoyment in it. And 2020 came around, and at the time, it was a very different landscape than it is now, and thankfully so. I wanted to create something that would be a way to something that I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to start my own podcast, and I wanted it to be something that would be a break from a lot of the divisive stuff that was going on in the world. There was a lot of angry, frightened people in the world, and I was just getting tired of it. And I wanted to create something that would allow people to have an opportunity to just, kind of calm down and enjoy something as a community, because the community is from people of all different walks of life. And as the situation with COVID and politics and whatnot progressed, things started to calm down, and people continued to listen to the show. The show grew, and I was still putting out a lot of content because, I didn't have as many outside of the house obligations. And it was a good thing. It was a positive thing for me. People were enjoying it. But as the world has opened up more and the podcast boom, if you want to call it that, has kind of taken hold, I've been rethinking how I want to put out content. I don't want to sacrifice quality for quantity. I like to put out a good show that I can say I'm proud of, and I like to have people that are interesting. And if there's a solo topic that I want to get off my chest, I might just do a quick solo episode about it. But I'm not trying to fill out the same quota because the pace is just it's a bit much now. So I want to put out shows when I can, and not have to compete with all the other stuff that's out there now, because there's been this inundation of podcasts within the past 2 years where I wish I had a number I could quote here, but just in this little, reptile amphibian invert world, it's grown very exponentially, even though it's a somewhat of a niche content. And I've seen some people put out shows that they do a great job. They do an amazing job. And I've seen some shows that are just not my cup of tea exactly. And my problem was I found that I'm being overwhelmed with stuff that I would normally listen to for recreational purposes. And, I have like 8 or 9 or 10 shows that I follow, and I'm not listening to all of them, because as soon as I start listening to one, another one comes out and I start listening to that one. So I'm trying to just keep the content consistent, but not over the top where I'm putting out stuff that might just get lost by the wayside. And I'm trying to get a hold of some new guests. I have some great repeat guests who I'm always happy to have on, but it is a niche content. It is somewhat of a limited pool here, and the amount of new research and things like that does not come at the fast pace that certain other topics. You'll have like viral topics and whatnot that'll come up from time to time, and yeah, that's topical and people will have an interest in that. But I'll talk to researchers about a project that they completed 2 years ago, and then we'll have a great conversation. Say, oh, by the way, I'm going to Madagascar, or I'm going to Panama, or I'm going to Colombia, or I'm going to Ecuador, whatever. And that next project might take 2, 3, 4 years before it goes into pre-publication, where they can even remotely hint at it. So it is a slow process, but that's just the research end of it. So I was able to get a lot of content. I mean, I've done, by the time we're doing this, almost 200 episodes. So it's been quite the ride. But, also at this point in my life, the world is more of an open place. Things have kind of calmed down a bit. So I'm outside. I have a life outside of podcasting. So I have to balance that with the show. And at this point in my life, it's just better for me. It's better for the audience, and it's better for the overall product if it's at a pace that I find that I can manage comfortably and that people can appreciate as listeners comfortably.
I think that's a really interesting whole segment there of itself. You're adapting to your audience, and to put into perspective what you're saying, and maybe this isn't the best way to describe it, but I think it'll be a good way for the audience to kind of get to grasp what I'm seeing. As somebody else who's also in the media realm, but more so YouTube and video, I'd almost like to say that podcasters with reptiles and amphibians and inverts are almost like shooting stars or falling stars. You looked up in 2020, 22, 24, and you see, so many stars shining bright. You saw so much in the night sky, so much promise. But as you keep looking, it just seems like more and more either getting burnt out, or they're just leaving it, or, just people are not staying consistent with it. And there's a lot going on right now within I think the podcast realm. I think people underestimated what it would take to stay in it for the long run. I think people came out guns a-blazing right in the beginning, which you had to if you wanted to get big. But how are you going to sustain that afterwards? And it's hard to keep coming up with ideas. It's hard to keep coming up with like, what's the next thing? But in your case, it's a little different because your audience is with you through various topics. It's not like you're a niche like ball python group, or specifically towards whatever species of frog. Even though you might specialize in it, it doesn't mean that you can't transition to a guy in Pennsylvania talking about native frogs versus a monk in Japan with, salamanders. I mean, that's pretty diverse right there, and to have your audience stay with you. So it's a good testament to you knowing your audience and kind of feeling it out that, less is more in your situation, which that might be true. You might drop to 2 a month, if you already haven't. And you might start seeing a tick up in views because people, like what I've realized doing Frog Week, a video every day or a couple videos a day for an entire week, if you oversaturate it, you overwhelm your audience, you overwhelm the listener, and then they either will not listen to all of them or watch all of them, or they'll feel so overwhelmed that they'll, they might only pick one or two, and it might be the very first two that come out. There might be like the main one for the month. For your case, it might be week 3 or week 4 that was actually the heavy hitter out of the 4 of them. So I completely get that in terms of placement and what you want to accomplish. So I didn't say all that to like make you sound like one of those like shooting stars. I just say
No, I
like
understand.
there's others that I've talked with that like they're no longer doing podcasts and stuff. So
it is. It's a lot of work, and I like to be excited about something. I want to be, if I get a guest or a topic or something I'm looking forward to, I get excited and I want to do it. But I don't want it to get lost in the wash, like you just said. And I've found that engagement kind of goes through cycles where it'll rise and it'll fall, and you have to ask yourself, how do you adapt with the changes? If you want to create a brand or an idea, you can't do the same thing for year after year after year and necessarily have success. And when you think about just entertainment, because I pay attention to that stuff too. I pay attention to trends in entertainment, like what are people interested in, and think about let's just think about, say, movies, for example. All right, the second Beetlejuice movie came out after 40 years. I mean, the original one, I watched that like countless times when I was a kid. I remember when it came out in theater, actually, and that took probably a couple of years for them to film and whatnot, and then it came out and people will have it to enjoy. But it's a one-time thing. Like with podcasting, you can't just create an hour and a half episode and have that just sit into perpetuity. People are not going to line up to listen to old episodes over and over and over again. Like episode 50 of Amphibicast is not going to air every Thanksgiving at 6 p.m. It's not it's not like that. So it's a challenge to stay current and to stay relevant. So you have to adapt with regards to like what are people interested in. And now with the short form content, people like quick 3-second clips and scrolling. And I'm guilty of it too. I'll sit and scroll for a long time, and unless something really catches your eye to engage you, there's just so much information out there that it's kind of overwhelming. And I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of that oversaturation of this type of market. So my goal is that going on pause for certain sections, whether it's 2 or 3 weeks or even a month, when the episode does come back, it's going to get more engagement because people will have delayed gratification for it as well. So that's part of it as well. I don't want people to scroll past the show because like, I'm so behind on episodes. I haven't caught this one or that one. I want people to be engaged. And if this is a better strategy to get people engaged, I'm all for it. Plus putting content out every week is tough. It is.
yeah,
It was tough for a long time. And I remember in the beginning being hard on myself for not recording episodes around Thanksgiving and Christmas. I was like, all right, you know what? It's Thanksgiving, Christmas. No one's going to kill you for not putting out an episode. And it was fine. But after that, year after year, I'm like, you know what? It's, if I'm going to put out a real banger that people are really going to listen to, it's okay. It can, you don't have to put out a filler episode to just fill a time slot.
I agree. I completely agree with that. I'd say too, one of the issues that it's not really an issue for me, but like one of the things that I'm so focused on, we talked about this off camera, but I don't know that you'll find a bigger fan than for my brand than me with what I'm doing. I mean, I'm so enthusiastic about the animals and about spending time with friends, going on the hikes, or like keeping up with you guys on the podcast, different people that I can't physically see every day, but I still get to keep up with you guys fairly regularly, whether it's through chatting on social media or bringing you on the podcast. So I really look forward to the stuff that I'm involved in. And I think that's why even if you if some people might think, oh, it's redundant with what Aaron's doing. I don't really think anybody's saying that, but like, I'm just I'm just too not like I'm just not worried about it. Like I'm just in maybe I'm in my own world, however people want to look at that, but I'm very happy and grateful for what I have around me. And I don't really, I mean, it doesn't mean I don't want to continue to build an audience, but I don't need to go and buy like the newest pet on the shelf or the latest and greatest. We don't have to buy a $10,000 drone for the hiking show. But I will say what you brought up, I think this will be a very interesting year for Frog Week because there's been some ups and downs and some critics about it's 6 years going on 7. How's this going to be different? You've shown us redundantly over and over some of the same spots. Yeah. Well, it's just funny. Let's just say it's a whole new weapon. The bases are loaded. It just kind of depends on if I can get 1 or 2 hits to really knock out of the park. This will be the first Frog Week that's going to be very scientific and very research-based, heavily based compared to the other ones. But the storytelling will be significantly different. It's going to be completely new faces, new concepts. I'm with you in terms of how do you, it's been 6 years going on 7 years for Frog Week. I've been doing it a long time now. And we talk about listeners. Imagine the media. Imagine like the newspapers and radio people that want to bring you on. I mean, how do you stay relevant with those people consistently? And so I think in some ways, I think there's going to be a great comeback in 2025 for Frog Week. I really think it's going to perform better than when it did in 2024 and 23.